Welcome to the deep dive where we really try to crack open some impactful sources and pull out the knowledge you need to navigate, well, a pretty messy world.
Yeah, it is messy.
And today we are wrestling with a question that I think haunts pretty much anyone trying to build something new. Why do so many promising ventures just crash and burn?
It's the central tragedy of entrepreneurship, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're diving into a book that, well, Silicon Valley legend Steve Blank famously said every founding team should stop for 48 hours and read.
Wow.
Seriously, he said stop and read this book now.
That's a bold statement. And Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, he was just as emphatic, calling it the roadmap for innovation for the 21st century that will help create the next industrial revolution. I mean, those are not endorsements you hear every day.
Absolutely not. And the source of all this buzz, it's Eric Ries' foundational book, The Lean Startup.
Right.
And Eric's perspective, it comes from the trenches.
Mm.
He started out as a programmer, co-founded a company called IMVU, and he really lived through that gut-wrenching pain of working incredibly hard, pouring years into building something,
Yeah.
only to see it fail in the market.
That feeling of colossal waste, all that time, that passion, the skill, just poured into building something nobody actually wanted.
Yeah,
That's really what sparked this whole movement, right?
exactly. Eric's mission, and the book's mission, is basically to dramatically improve the success rate of new innovative products, worldwide,
Oh,
by providing a new kind of management paradigm, one specifically for startups.
okay, startups. But Rees has a very specific definition of that, doesn't he? It's important.
He does. It's crucial. It's not just like that romantic image of two people in a garage.
Right.
He defines a startup as a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
Extreme uncertainty. Okay, so that means entrepreneurs aren't just in Silicon Valley, they're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. If you're an executive at a big company trying to launch a new division, or maybe leading a project team in a nonprofit facing unknowns about what users actually need,
You're an entrepreneur.
you're an entrepreneur, according to this, an intrapreneur.
Precisely. And that is where the traditional ways of running businesses often just fall apart.
Like the detailed plans, the rigid strategies.
And all that long-term planning,
Yeah.
strategy documents, extensive upfront market research, those methods work beautifully when you have a clear understanding of your customers, the market,
When things are stable.
Yeah, stable. But startups, by Reese's definition, they have way too much unknown. You don't know the customer. You don't really know the product for sure. The future is unpredictable. So the old playbook, it just wasn't designed for that kind of environment.
Okay, so for this deep dive, our mission is let's get into the source material from the Lean Startup, pull out those absolutely essential insights, and give you, the listener, whether you're wrestling with a new project, maybe working inside a large company, or even just intensely curious, the practical lessons you need to navigate that uncertainty.
And hopefully avoid that soul-crushing waste.
Yeah, let's avoid that.
Okay, let's start with the foundation. Rees outlines 5 core principles. The first, well, like we just touched on, is that entrepreneurs are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Think of someone like Mark, maybe an executive trying to create new ventures in a big company, or the SnapTax team at Intuit. They're entrepreneurs. They're operating under uncertainty inside an established organization.
Got it. Okay, second principle.
Entrepreneurship is management. A startup isn't just some wild idea. It's an institution, right? It's a company that needs a new kind of management, one that's geared towards uncertain future growth, not just executing a known plan.
Okay, a new kind of management.
Third, and this one is, I think, perhaps the most profound shift the book offers, is validated learning.
Validated learning.
Yeah. Startups don't exist simply to make stuff, or even just make money initially. Their primary purpose is to learn how to build a sustainable business.
Okay.
And this learning, it has to be validated scientifically, through rigorous experiments that test your fundamental assumptions.
Validated learning. Okay, so this feels like a total redefinition of progress then. You might feel productive because you're busy, your team is shipping code, maybe you're hitting internal deadlines.
Right, and that's the trap. By all the traditional measures, you look like you're making progress. You're executing efficiently.
But if you're executing perfectly on the wrong plan, if you're building something nobody actually wants.
That's just incredibly efficient waste.
Ouch.
Validated learning is the metric that tells you if you're actually moving towards something customers will eventually pay for or use meaningfully. It's the real unit of progress, not just activity.
Real unit of progress.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which brings us neatly to the fourth principle, The build, measure, learn loop.
Ah, yes, the famous loop.
This is the core feedback cycle. It's what allows you to steer when everything's uncertain. You
Hmm.
take your ideas, you turn them into products that
Mm.
build. Then you see how real customers actually use and respond to those products. That's
Hmm.
measure.
Right.
And then you analyze that data, the measurement, to figure out if you should pivot, like change your strategy fundamentally or persevere, keep going on the current path. That's learn.
Build, measure, learn. So this loop is your compass, right? Your
Yeah.
steering wheel. It's how you navigate the fog.
Exactly. And finally, the fifth principle, innovation accounting. Since standard business metrics, financial forecasts, they're pretty useless when everything is uncertain,
Yeah, the forecasts are always wrong.
always. So you need new metrics, metrics specifically designed to measure learning and track progress in that startup context.
Okay, let's dig into validated learning a bit more. Using Eric Ries's own story at IMVU sounds like a good way.
It is. It's very illustrative. He and his co-founders, they thought they had this brilliant strategy, right? Tap into the massive instant messaging market, hundreds of millions of users, using cutting-edge 3D avatar technology.
Sounds ambitious. The engineering challenge must have been huge.
Enormous. Building virtual worlds, user-generated content, commerce, micropayments, complex avatar rendering on everyone's potentially different computers. They just threw themselves into it, applied all the best traditional development methods they knew,
And then came the launch.
and then the launch. Eric describes it very simply.
Nothing happened.
Slight pause.
Oh.
Nothing. Like literally nothing. After all that work,
Nothing. Zero traction. He said initially they were almost relieved, thinking maybe nobody would see their bugs.
oh wow.
But the crushing realization quickly dawned. Their value proposition was so fundamentally disconnected from what customers wanted, people weren't even getting far enough into the product to see it, let alone find bugs.
Wow. Talk about a painful moment of learning. So what did they do? Well, they set these tiny revenue targets like $300, $350, $400, and were practically begging friends and family to sign up.
Oh, dear.
Meanwhile, the engineering team kept improving the product daily, shipping new versions constantly. They were doing everything right by the standards of how they'd been trained as engineers and entrepreneurs, working hard, shipping features.
Right.
But customer behavior didn't change. They weren't acquiring more users. They weren't driving more sales. This is that core dilemma Ries faced. By every traditional measure, they were productive,
You were busy.
super busy spending their capital on time and features, building the product efficiently. But they were efficiently building something nobody wanted.
And the true cost of that, it's not just the money, is it? It's the human energy, those years of passion poured into what turns out to be just efficient waste.
Exactly. The real progress, they eventually understood, was whatever they learned about what customers actually valued, even if that learning was painful.
Okay, so that directly leads us to the build, measure, learn loop in action. After that initial devastating launch, how did they shift their approach?
Well, they started bringing actual potential customers, like teenagers who were heavy IM users, into the office to watch them try the product.
Okay, get them in the room. And what happened?
Confusion. Lots of confusion.
Yeah.
When they introduced the IM add-on concept, the teenagers were just like bewildered. What's that? They'd ask. And they kept hearing things like, I want to use it by myself first.
Okay, that sounds totally counterintuitive to their initial brilliant strategy, which assumed you'd use it with your existing friends. Why would you want a social product just for yourself initially?
Exactly. That was the team's internal bias talking.
Mhm.
But the customers, the actual teenagers they watched, they were clear. They wanted to try it out, see if it was cool before inviting friends.
Interesting.
They weren't afraid of learning a new program or bringing friends along. Actually, they seemed to enjoy the challenge of exploring something new. And the most surprising learning, they wanted to use the avatars and the virtual world to make new friends, not just talk to their old ones.
Okay, so their foundational assumption, the value was connecting with existing friends via an IM add-on, just got completely torn apart by customer reality.
Absolutely shredded. That's powerful, validated learning.
Painful but powerful.
Very painful. And it highlighted that traditional agile methods, which Eric had used effectively elsewhere, well, they were designed to eliminate waste in manufacturing where the value proposition is known and stable.
Right.
Here, the value was totally unknown. So while they were efficiently eliminating bugs and building features, they were wasting effort building the wrong features. The true waste wasn't in the process. It was building the wrong thing efficiently.
This insight must have been the real pivot point for Ries. It led to that question that kept him up at night, right?
Yes. Did they really have to build the whole complex product to learn those fundamental things about customer behavior?
Mhm.
Could they possibly have tested those core assumptions before spending years on engineering?
And this is where the MVP comes in.
This is where the concept of the minimum viable product, the MVP, emerges.
Yeah.
And it's not about building the smallest possible product. It's about building the fastest way to get through the build, measure, learn loop and start that validated learning.
The fastest way to learn.
It's the quickest path to testing your riskiest assumptions with real customers using the minimum effort required to get that learning started.
Minimum effort to learn. Okay, so it's not about minimum features. It's about minimum time to validated learning.
Precisely.
Sure.
And MVPs can look incredibly low-tech. Think about Groupon's beginnings.
Yeah.
They didn't build some complex e-commerce platform right away. They started with a simple blog, manually created PDFs for coupons, and initially ran a pizza coupon deal in their own office lobby.
Wait, they ran a deal for employees in their own office as the test.
Essentially, yeah, as a pilot. It was incredibly basic, but it was enough to test the core hypothesis. Will people sign up and use a coupon deal purchase this way? That super low-tech approach validated the demand extremely quickly
Before building all the tech.
before investing in complex technology.
That's incredible. Or Zappos, right, the online shoe giant. The founder started with just a tiny, basic website.
Yeah, his core question was simple. Is there any demand at all for buying shoes online?
And his product.
His product was unbelievably lean. He would literally walk into retail shoe stores, take photos of shoes, post them on his basic website.
No way.
And if someone ordered, you go back to the store, buy the shoes at full retail price, and manually ship them to the customer himself.
Wow. So he wasn't building a warehouse or an inventory system. He was just testing the demand hypothesis. That is pure MVP thinking.
Exactly. It tested demand, got him interacting directly with real customers, and provided crucial qualitative and quantitative learning without massive upfront investment.
Even at IMVU, you mentioned their MVP for avatar movement wasn't like smooth walking animation.
No, it was stationary avatars that would just teleport. They worried it felt clunky, compared to gaming standards.
Sure.
But customers didn't care about the animation quality. They cared about being able to move within the space. The teleportation MVP tested the value of movement itself, not the perfection of the execution.
This really highlights that counterintuitive nature of MVP quality. It's often intentionally low quality or incomplete by traditional standards.
Totally. The goal isn't perfection. It's learning as fast as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Craigslist. Super functional, successful for years, not exactly a paragon of high design. Definitely.
Okay, but I can hear the listener thinking, okay, but what about the risks? What if competitors steal my amazing idea when my MVP is so basic?
It's a natural fear, isn't it? Especially in competitive markets. But Ries offers a really provocative perspective on this.
Yeah.
He basically argues it's often incredibly difficult just to get anyone to notice your startup, let alone a busy competitor in some large company who is probably drowning in their own good ideas.
Chuckles. Okay, yeah, that's true. Getting initial traction can feel impossible sometimes.
Exactly. Managers in established companies aren't usually lacking good ideas. They're struggling with the execution challenge. He kind of jokes, if only it were so easy to have a good idea stolen. It would mean your idea was instantly recognized as valuable and you had significant visibility. The real risk isn't being copied early on. It's building something complex in secret and finding out way too late that nobody actually wants it.
That's a really good reframing. Okay, what about the fear of a false negative? What if your MVP is too low quality and customers reject it not because the core idea is bad, but just because the implementation is terrible?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. But the lean philosophy sort of embraces that risk. An MVP is a reality check. If customers reject even the core value presented through your MVP, that's a strong signal.
A signal to stop.
Not necessarily stop. It doesn't mean the idea is dead. It
Yeah.
just means your current approach to delivering that value isn't working. Or maybe the underlying assumption itself is wrong. The solution isn't to build more to prove the idea. It's to learn why it failed and iterate.
So change the MVP, change the target customer.
And make a strategic pivot, yeah.
Got it. It's a signal to adjust, not necessarily give up. And the MVP provides the first real data point for that innovation accounting thing, right?
Yes, exactly. Even if the numbers are bad initially, Low signups, low conversion rates, that's your baseline. That's the starting point for learning and measuring whether future changes actually improve customer behavior.
Which takes us deeper into innovation accounting and the need for these new metrics. Why don't standard business metrics work again?
Well, because standard metrics like financial forecasts, revenue targets, or hitting feature milestones, they measure execution against a known plan. But startups operate under uncertainty where the plan itself is constantly being tested and changed.
Right.
So you need metrics that measure learning and show whether you're actually progressing towards a sustainable business model, not just, staying busy.
And this is where those dreaded vanity metrics come in. The ones that feel good but don't actually tell you anything useful.
Exactly. Vanity metrics are those numbers that always go up and to the right on a chart, like total customers, total questions answered, total downloads. They give you this illusion of progress.
Feels good.
Feels great. But they don't show cause and effect. They don't tell you why things are happening or whether your changes are actually improving customer behavior in a meaningful way.
The Grokkit example you mentioned earlier is perfect here, right? The founders saw total user numbers going up and felt good, thought they were improving.
Yeah, they were optimizing based on those gross numbers. But they couldn't tell if the growth was due to new marketing they did, or specific features they shipped, or just some external factor entirely.
They were busy shipping features.
Right, but they didn't know if those features were actually driving growth or improving the fundamental business model. They were in real danger of achieving failure, building a product perfectly, but failing as a business because they didn't understand their customers or what truly drove value.
So what kind of metrics are useful then? What should people track?
Actionable metrics. These are the metrics that demonstrate cause and effect. They help you understand why customers are behaving the way they are and whether your specific changes have a real impact.
And they need to be.
They need to be accessible, like in simple units, people, not abstract hits, and auditable, meaning you can trust the data and how it was collected.
Okay, actionable, accessible, auditable. And a key technique for getting that actionable data is split testing or A/B testing.
Oh, absolutely crucial. You show different versions of your product or your website or even just a feature to different segments of your customers simultaneously.
And measure the difference.
And measure the difference in their behavior. This allows you to infer cause and effect. Does changing this specific variable lead to a measurable change in that customer behavior?
Like the IMVU example again, where they split tested just changing the positioning text?
Yes. Simple change. They showed one group avatar chat and another group 3D instant messaging. And the group that saw 3D instant messaging was significantly more likely to sign up and eventually become paying customers.
That's actionable data. Changing the words had a measurable impact on conversion. Wow.
Huge. And Grokkit used split testing too, remember. They tested lazy registration, letting users try the product first versus requiring immediate sign-up.
Right. They thought letting people try it first would increase sign-up.
That was the hypothesis. But the split test showed zero difference. Customer behavior didn't change at all.
Really?
Yeah. Which revealed that the decision to sign up wasn't based on using the product itself first. It was likely something else entirely, like how the product was positioned or marketed initially. That's incredibly powerful learning from seemingly simple data.
Yeah. Okay, so innovation accounting isn't just about the metrics themselves, it's also about the process around them. Ries talks about applying concepts like Kanban from lean manufacturing.
Right. Kanban, it's a visual workflow management system, and a key part of it is limiting work in progress, or WIP. Grokkit adopted this.
And how did that change things for them?
It forced a different kind of discipline. Instead of measuring progress by how many features they built or how busy the developers seemed, Kanban limited the number of features that could be in the building stage, or, critically, the awaiting validation stage. It made it painfully clear when the team was blocked, not because development was slow, but because they were waiting for validated learning from customers before they could justify moving on to the next feature.
So it forces you to focus on learning speed, not just build speed. You literally can't start building the next thing until you've learned if the last thing actually worked with customers.
Precisely. It shifts the focus squarely onto delivering validated learning, not just delivering features. And after you go through this whole build, measure, learn cycle, using innovation accounting and actionable metrics, you arrive at that really crucial decision point.
Pivot or persevere.
Exactly. Innovation accounting provides the objective data to help make this decision. If you're working hard, you're running experiments, but the actual metrics clearly show you're not moving the key drivers of your business model. Well, that's the signal. It's probably time for a pivot, a fundamental change in strategy.
And what's the alternative to pivoting when you really need to? What happens if you just keep persevering when the data says otherwise?
That's what Ries calls the land of the living dead.
Ooh, sounds grim.
It is. It's this painful state where a company has achieved just enough, maybe moderate success, to survive perhaps a small user base, some revenue, but it isn't growing significantly. It just consumes human energy and capital without ever really reaching sustainability or its potential.
Sort of zombies shuffling along.
Kind of, yeah. Innovation accounting helps you see that slow march towards nowhere much more clearly, allowing you to make that tough pivot decision before it's truly too late.
Okay, let's talk more about pivots then. What exactly constitutes a pivot? Is it just any change?
No, Rivas defines it quite specifically. It's a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product or the business model or maybe the engine of growth.
A fundamental hypothesis.
Yeah. And it's really important to frame it not as a failure of execution, but as a necessary strategic adjustment based on that validated learning you've gathered.
David Benetti's story with Vodazone sounds like a brilliant illustration of this, with multiple pivots. His first MVP was a social network for verified voters, right?
Yes, he built an MVP, got some early adopters, seemed like, moderate success on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
But after 8 months of optimization and experiments, the key numbers for his desired growth model, things like registration rates, activation, retention, referral, they just weren't moving significantly,
Even though they were working hard.
even though they were busy making improvements. The innovation accounting showed they weren't actually building a sustainable business towards his goal.
So even with that moderate success, the data told him he was kind of stuck in the land of the living dead relative to his ambition. He needed to pivot.
Exactly. He made the tough call. Pivot number 2 was something called a 2Gov transactional. The hypothesis was that activists would pay for the ability to contact verified voters directly.
And?
The metrics changed dramatically. Referral rates shot up.
Mm-hmm.
But the revenue was tiny, less than 1%.
Okay, so the mechanism for connecting activists and voters worked, but the monetization hypothesis failed. Another pivot needed.
Right. Pivot number 3 was a platform pivot, inspired by Google AdWords. They built a self-serve platform where basically anyone could pay to contact verified voters based on specific criteria. This finally unlocked a viable growth model. It significantly improved all their key metrics, including substantial revenue.
That's fascinating. And what's incredible about the Vodazone story is how their build, measure, learn cycle actually accelerated with each pivot. You said the first MVP took 8 months.
Yeah, and the next took 4 months, then 3 months, and that final successful pivot took just 1 month.
Wow. How did they speed up so much?
Well, Ries argues this acceleration wasn't primarily because they got better at coding or built lots of reusable infrastructure.
Yeah.
Actually, much of the old stuff was discarded with each pivot.
So what was it?
It was because they were learning faster about their customers, about the market, about what business models could actually work. Each cycle of validated learning made the next experiment more informed, more targeted.
That learned speed is the real competitive advantage. That makes sense. And this ties directly into what actually drives sustainable growth, which
Right.
Ries calls the engines of growth.
Yes, sustainable growth doesn't just happen. It comes from the actions of past customers. These actions power feedback loops, and these are the engines of growth. The sticky engine, the viral engine, and the paid engine.
Sticky, viral, paid. And Ries argues you really need to focus on mastering one of these, right? Not try to do all three at once.
Precisely. Trying to optimize for customer retention and virality and paid acquisition all at the same time usually just leads to optimizing for none of them effectively. Successful startups typically pick one engine and really specialize in making it incredibly effective for their business.
Okay, so what are the key metrics or ideas for each engine? Let's start with sticky.
The sticky engine is all about high customer retention and low churn. Think of essential services, maybe like Intuit's core TurboTax or QuickBooks products. The goal is to keep your existing customers happy, engaged, so they stick around for a long, long time.
Makes sense. Okay, viral.
The viral engine focuses on making sure each customer brings in more than one new customer. You need a viral coefficient greater than 1.0 for true viral growth.
Like Hotmail back in the day, or Tupperware parties even.
Exactly. Strong viral loops. This often means removing friction, so companies relying heavily on this engine might not charge users directly, at least initially, to speed up that loop.
Gotcha. And the third one, paid.
The paid engine relies on a simple equation. Your customer lifetime value, LTV, must be greater than your cost per acquisition, CPA. You spend money to acquire customers through ads, sales, etc., and you need to make more money from them over their lifetime than it cost you to get them in the first place.
Right. And the paid engine seems tricky because competition often bids up the CPA, the cost to acquire. So you need some kind of edge.
You absolutely do. You need differentiation. You have to find ways to either increase the value you get from each customer, the LTV, or find cheaper, more efficient ways to acquire them than your competitors can.
Like IMVU finding ways to monetize lower income users.
Exactly. That allowed them to actually pay more to acquire those customers than competitors could afford to, giving them an advantage in that paid channel.
So understanding which engine really drives your potential growth, that focuses your efforts and tells you which innovation accounting metrics actually matter most for you.
It provides that clear, quantitative test for whether you've achieved product market fit for that specific growth model. It guides everything.
Okay, let's loop back to a concept we touched on earlier, the power of small batches. It still seems kind of counterintuitive, like that newsletter stuffing example Ries uses. Stuffing one envelope completely before starting the next feels slower than, say, folding all the letters first, then stuffing all the envelopes, then sealing all of them in big batches.
Right. Intuitively, large batches feel more efficient for individual steps. But systemically, the small batch approach doing one envelope start to finish is much faster overall. Why?
Why?
Because if you run out of stamps, or maybe the envelopes don't seal properly, you discover that problem immediately after the first envelope.
Not after you've folded and stuffed 1,000 of them.
Exactly. The problem is found and fixed instantly, minimizing waste and rework for the entire batch.
And this comes from the Toyota production system, right? Developed because Toyota had, like, capital constraints and a smaller domestic market, forcing them to be incredibly efficient and flexible.
Yes. They couldn't afford huge specialized machines like their U.S. counterparts often had. So they used smaller, more general-purpose machines and became obsessed with reducing changeover time, how quickly they could switch machine from making one part to making a different part. This gave them incredible speed and flexibility.
And the key advantage was finding problems faster, like with the famous and-on cord, where any worker could stop the entire assembly line if they spotted an issue.
Right. Stopping the line frequently sounds inefficient, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it means problems are caught when they're small and cheap to fix. This leads to drastically higher quality and actually lower overall cost compared to finding big problems later, which requires massive, expensive rework.
So how does this apply to startups and innovation beyond manufacturing?
Small batches translate directly to faster feedback loops in product development. You get code or features or even just ideas out to customers much faster in smaller increments. So you find out sooner if there's a bug, if they understand it, or crucially, if they even value it.
And this prevents that large batch death spiral you see in traditional development.
Exactly. Like the example of a designer creating 30 detailed drawings in a big batch, handing them off, and then problems are only found much, much later in the process, causing huge delays and rework for everyone.
Or like that Intuit QuickBooks team story. Under their old large batch process, you said it took like 5.5 years to get a new product generating $50 million in revenue.
Yeah, 5.5 years. They were efficient at their individual tasks, sure, but the overall system was incredibly slow and didn't find fundamental problems until very late in the game.
So the leaders there, Greg and Himanshu, they looked at lean principles.
They did. They basically tossed out the old processes. They invested in technology like virtualization to get product versions out to customers faster, essentially creating smaller batches, and started running these intense idea code solution jams.
They moved to smaller batches of releases, faster cycles, iterating quickly.
And the results were dramatic. They generated $50 million in revenue from new offerings in just 1 year.
1 year versus 5.5. Wow.
Huge difference. They saw higher customer satisfaction, much faster time to revenue. It wasn't just about the tech. It was fundamentally changing their process to enable faster learning and iteration in small batches.
Okay, so part of building that adaptive organization that can find and fix problems fast is also having a structured way to get to the root cause when problems do occur. Ries brings in another tool from Toyota, the 5 whys.
This is such a deceptively simple technique, but really powerful. When you encounter a problem, you just ask why 5 times consecutively to drill down from the immediate symptom to the underlying root cause.
Okay, give us an example. How does that work?
Well, Taiichi Ono, the father of the Toyota production system, used this classic one. A machine stopped working. Okay, why?
The fuse blew.
Right. Why did the fuse blow?
There was an overload.
Okay. Why was there an overload?
The pump wasn't sufficient.
It's getting closer. Why wasn't the pump sufficient?
Maybe the shaft was worn out?
Yep. And finally, why was the shaft worn out?
I don't know. Lack of maintenance.
In his example, it was because there was no strainer on the pump inlet, allowing debris to get in and damage the shaft over time.
Ah. So the root cause wasn't the fuse or the overload or even the pump itself directly. It was a human or process error much further upstream, failing to install a simple, cheap strainer.
Exactly. Or think about it in a software context. A feature gets disabled suddenly. Why?
The server failed.
Why did the server fail?
A specific subsystem broke.
Okay, why did the subsystem break?
Maybe the engineer didn't know how to use that subsystem correctly, made a mistake.
Plausible. Why didn't the engineer know?
Uh-oh, they weren't properly trained on it.
Right. And one more. Why wasn't the engineer trained?
Maybe their manager was too busy or training wasn't prioritized.
Exactly. Again, a technical symptom often leads back to a managerial or human process issue at the root.
So the 5 whys helps you dig past the surface symptoms.
Right. And the principle then is to fix the root cause, but also, and this is important, to invest proportionally to the problem's impact. You don't rebuild your entire company training program because of one minor glitch caused by one untrained person.
Right, scale the fix to the problem.
But a widespread problem might indeed require a more significant systemic fix. These incremental improvements, found quickly using small batches, root-caused using 5 whys, and fixed proportionally, they compound over time. They free up all that energy previously spent just firefighting symptoms.
And that creates that adaptive organization that can respond and learn continuously. That makes sense.
Now, stepping back a bit, remember that very first principle we talked about. Entrepreneurs are everywhere.
Right, including inside large companies. Entrepreneurs.
They face the same core challenge, creating new products under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
And the SnapTax story at Intuit is a perfect illustration of this actually succeeding within a big organization. You mentioned a small team, 5 people.
Yeah, just 5 people. And they were given this island of freedom, essentially, supported by executive sponsors who actively shielded them from a lot of the usual corporate bureaucracy.
What was their challenge?
Their initial challenge was automating tax data collection from W-2 forms. They weren't sure how customers would actually get the W-2s into the system, anticipating maybe issues with printers and scanners, things like that.
Okay.
So they ran experiments, they got customer feedback,
Right.
which eventually led them to the idea of using a mobile phone camera to just snap a photo of the W-2.
Okay, that's a great idea, a neat solution. But the real innovation came later, right?
It did. It came when customers, after using the photo feature, started asking, hey, this is cool, but can I just do the whole return on the phone?
Yeah. That wasn't the original plan at all.
Not at all. But it was a massive piece of validated learning coming directly from customer interaction. And it led to a truly significant innovation, completing an entire tax return on a mobile device, something few thought possible or desirable before.
And this happened not because Intuit hired some external gurus, but by enabling their own internal teams. Leadership, specifically Scott Cook, realized their traditional management approach was actually stifling continuous innovation.
Exactly. He apparently stopped trying to play Caesar, personally approving every single new idea. Instead, he focused on building the systems and the culture that enabled small teams to experiment independently.
Like the infrastructure needed to run hundreds of experiments.
Yeah, Intuit invested heavily in that. TurboTax now runs up to 500 experiments per tax season. This empowers employees to become entrepreneurs within the company, running experiments, learning directly from data, rather than spending all their energy playing internal politics just to get an idea approved.
So for nurturing really disruptive innovation inside a large company, Ries proposes this concept of the innovation sandbox. What is that exactly? It sounds protective.
It is. It's not a free-for-all. It's a carefully constructed space. It provides internal teams with scarce but secure resources enough to run experiments, but not so much that they become wasteful or complacent. They get independent authority to make decisions based on their validated learning, not based on layers of management approval. And critically, the team members need to have a personal stake in the outcome, some skin in the game.
And the sandbox aspect, it protects both sides, doesn't it? It protects the small, fragile innovation team from the, let's say, corporate antibodies that might try to shut down anything different.
Yeah. And it also protects the parent company from being unduly disrupted or damaged by its own internal experiments if they happen to go sideways.
So it promotes that rapid iteration and learning in small batches, but kind of safely separated from the core optimizing business.
Exactly. So Large, established companies really need to think like a portfolio manager. They need to simultaneously tune their existing, known engine of growth to sustaining innovation. Again, to actively develop entirely new sources of growth, disruptive innovation, by applying these lean startup principles to internal teams that act like startups.
But that requires different skills, different structures, different metrics for each part of the portfolio.
Absolutely. You manage them differently.
Okay, so bringing it all back together, back to the core problem, we set out to solve waste.
Yeah. The lean startup, fundamentally, it's about eliminating that colossal waste of people's precious time, their passion, their skills, building things that ultimately nobody wants.
And in the early 20th century, the big challenge was, increasing productivity. How do we build more stuff faster, cheaper?
Right. Mass production efficiency.
But today, in the 21st century, we can build almost anything we can imagine. The bottleneck isn't really manufacturing capability anymore, is it?
No, not
No.
usually. The big question today is not, can it be built? It's almost always, should it be built? Our prosperity, our ability to solve big problems and create real value, it depends much more on the quality of our imagination and our ability to effectively figure out what customers actually value, especially under uncertainty.
And the worst form of waste, the absolute antithesis of lean, is that concept you mentioned earlier, achieving failure.
Yeah, it's successfully executing a flawed plan, building that massive, efficient infrastructure for millions of users, only for nobody to show up. Or like Greg's QuickBooks team initially, building the wrong features perfectly, efficiently marching towards a failed outcome right from the start, even though they were doing good work.
That's the waste lean startup aims to prevent.
That's the core target.
Okay. So, wrapping up this deep dive then, what are the absolute key takeaways from the lean startup for you, the listener?
Okay, first I'd say traditional planning just fails under uncertainty. You need a new approach, one based on learning and discovery.
And validated learning is the only true unit of progress for any new initiative, whether you're in a garage startup or a huge corporation boardroom.
Absolutely. Use that build, measure, learn loop constantly. It's your dynamic steering wheel to navigate the unknown. Don't just set it and forget it.
Build minimum viable products, the fastest way to learn about your riskiest assumptions, even if they feel embarrassingly simple or low quality. Prioritize learning speed over perceived perfection early on.
And please, ignore vanity metrics. Focus ruthlessly on actual metrics that show real cause and effect. Use techniques like split testing to get genuine data about what works.
You need to understand which engine of growth, sticky, viral, or paid, really drives your potential business model, and then focus intensely on optimizing its specific key metrics. Don't try to boil the ocean.
Use small batches in your work and the 5 whys technique to find and fix problems quickly at their root cause. This enables continuous learning and helps build a truly adaptive organization.
And maybe most importantly, remember that entrepreneurial thinking and these lean methods aren't confined to tech startups in California. They apply everywhere you face uncertainty in creating something new.
So practically, how can you, the listener, start applying this stuff right now?
Well, think about a project you're working on, or an idea you have, or even just a task where you're making assumptions about what other people need or how they'll behave. What is the single riskiest assumption you are making right now?
And then, can you design the smallest possible experiment, your MVP, for that assumption to test it quickly? It might be just a landing page or a series of conversations, maybe a simple prototype or even a survey. It's probably much simpler than building the whole thing.
And commit to iteration. Commit
Yeah.
to learning from the results, especially if they're bad news. Remember, a pivot isn't giving up. It's a smart, data-driven strategy adjustment. It's a sign of learning.
And make it a point to get out of the building, as they say. Go talk to and observe your potential customers or users firsthand. Practice Genji Genbutsu. Go to the real place where the value is created or consumed. See it for yourself.
Yeah. This framework, it really fundamentally changes how you view work when the path forward isn't clear. It shifts the whole focus from just executing a predetermined plan to constantly discovering the right path through learning.
It's a powerful redefinition of what productivity and progress actually mean when you're dealing with uncertainty.
So as you think about your own work, or maybe a project you really care about, ask yourself this. What's one major assumption you're probably making, maybe without even realizing it, and what's the smallest, fastest, cheapest experiment you could design this week to see if that assumption actually holds up in reality?
Yeah, ponder that question. While the lean startup framework definitely goes deeper into things like scaling successfully, different specific types of pivots, building a truly experimental culture throughout an entire organization, grasping these core principles we've talked about today. That's the absolute essential first step.
It's the foundation for navigating that unpredictable world of innovation much more effectively.
Absolutely.
It really does feel like just the beginning of learning how to truly succeed under uncertainty, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. There's always more to learn.